AI agents are everywhere, and it seems like recently everybody wants to build one. But here's the thing, most of the times you don't even need an AI agent in the first place. In fact, they can get quite expensive quite fast. So what we're gonna do today is look at this article from Anthropic AI where they were supposed to say how to build effective agents, but if you actually look at the article, it really feels like they're just telling you why not to build an AI agent and what to build instead, and that is a workflow. So what we're gonna do in this video is go from the, if you wanna build agentic systems, is to go from the simplest workflow possible and then gradually build up and then eventually maybe building an AI agent. But you will be surprised to see how most applications do not need an AI agent because they are very unpredictable and very expensive as well. And actually a workflow is just as good, cheaper and much more predictable, so much less errors. But before getting there, let's start with a few definitions. So what is an AI agent in the first place? Well, so according to Anthropic, an agent is an AI that dynamically decides its own steps and how many iterations it needs to complete a task, whereas a workflow are predefined AI processes where each step is structured and predictable. So you can think of workflows as a train with the rails and the destinations that are all fixed and you know where you will end up. Whereas an AI agent is more like a self-driving car. So you don't know where you will end up and they autonomously decides where to go and how to get there, and sometimes also taking wrong turns. Now, before even considering a workflow, you should start trying to maximize your single LLM call, and you can do that with augmented LLMs. Essentially, you can take your LLM and see if you can make it better with the use of either retrieval that allows your LLM to call for external knowledge, tools that allow your LLM to access external APIs or application to execute on something, and then memory to essentially just remember stuff. And again, here remember that the point is to try to make it simple, so you may not need all the three of them, and maybe it's enough to have tools or retrievals. It depends, but try to not use necessarily all the three of them. Maybe you do need all the three of them, and maybe that's even not enough. If that's the case, then you can actually start going with the workflows, and the first workflow we're gonna look at is the prompt chaining workflow. You can think of this as an assembly line where each step is built on top of the output of the previous step. So you don't have to handle everything at the same time, but the task is divided into multiple LLM calls. So for example, let's say you want to create a marketing copy and translating it. You have the first LLM call that takes the input and creates an outline. Then if the outline is good, another LLM call can create a full document out of this outline, and then a third LLM call can take this document and translating it into multiple languages. Then we have routing. This is another workflow that is very useful, for example, for customer service automation, because what it does is that it takes the input and then decides where to send it to more specialized processes. So for example, you can have a router that can identify the input as a technical issue and then send it to the IT department, or it can understand that input is a refund request, so it can send it to the finance, or it can also understand that that's a general issue that you can easily solve with another AI LLM. So this is very useful because once you get your input, you can decide to which more specialized process you can send it to. So this is one use case for routing, but another very useful use case is if you want everything automated, you can still have a more complex task and more simple task. So your router can understand if it has to send a more complex task to a more elaborated, expensive and advanced model, whereas the more simple task to a faster and cheaper model, and then you get your output. Another very useful workflow is parallelization. This is where GPUs really shine, where NVIDIA made his money, and what it does is essentially that many LLM calls, they are all run simultaneously at the same time. This has two variations. The first one is sectioning, where you have multiple tasks that are run independently all at the same time, and then you have a voting when you have the same task that's run multiple times by different LLM calls again at the same time. Then you have an aggregator that takes the output of all of these and creates your final answer, your final output. This is very useful, for example, for automating evals. So when you have a base model, a foundational models, and you want to understand the coherence, the factual accuracy, or many other KPIs to understand how good the base model is, well, you can automate it like this. Then we have the orchestrator workflow. This is very similar to parallelization, but it's much better because it allows for more flexibilities. You can think of this as your project manager that takes the input and then decides the subtask based on the input. This is very useful, for example, for advanced research tasks, because you have your orchestrator that takes the input, breaks it down into multiple smaller tasks, and then assign to each LLM and different LLM calls each subtask for the research. For example, verifying the sources, finding more sources, or summarizing some articles. And then finally, we have a synthesizer that's similar to the aggregator, takes the output of all the LLM call and creates your final answer. Then finally, we have the last workflow, which is the evaluator optimizer. This kind of seems like an AI agent, but it's not, because it doesn't blindly do everything like an agent. But instead, what it does is that given an input, it tries to generate an answer that's given to the evaluator, but then the evaluator, if it's not good enough, it gives it back with the feedback, which essentially is an improved prompt. Then the generator uses to give another solution until the answer is accepted and you have your output. The difference between these and is that indeed the AI agent tries to do everything, whereas in this workflow we make sure that there is the evaluator that every time gives an improved prompt to use for the generator. Okay, so we said a bunch of stuff, but why and when should you actually build an AI agent? Where essentially AI agents are super capable, they can do a lot of stuff, but they are very expensive and they have a lot of latency. So you should actually build an AI agent when you cannot predict the number of iterations you need them, the number of steps that are needed for you to complete the task, when you are willing to pay the cost of a trial and error. Also, you should do it in an environment you trust. So for example, you don't want an AI agent to actually book your vacation if then you maybe find yourself that the AI agent mistakenly bought a trip for the wrong location. So you also have to be able to trust the environment. To be honest, that's pretty much it, but the bottom line is that you should not build an AI agent whenever you can build any of these workflows, because these workflows are more efficient, less costly, and more predictable. So if you cannot really do any of these workflows and the number of steps are unpredictable, you trust the environment, etc., then you do an AI agent. But as we've seen, there are many applications, the majority of them, where you can actually just go for a workflow. Again, not all of them. Maybe is actually the most interesting one that you can't do with a workflow. For example, Anthropic gave this example of an AI coding assistant, because another thing I didn't mention that you really need is to be able to really measure your outputs. Both is if it's an AI agent or if it's a workflow, you really need to be able to measure with numbers your output. Otherwise, you cannot build a workflow and not even an AI agent. So the very bottom line, if you want to build agentic system, is that you should start as simple as possible and only gradually increase the complexity of your workflows, eventually getting to an AI agent if needed, but make sure it's actually needed, and do it on something that you can actually measure. So for example, another thing that Anthropic said is that most of the agents for consumer applications are hard to do and a bit overhyped because it's very hard to measure them. The component of verifiability is really crucial if you want to build an agentic system, and that's what lack in most of consumer applications, but is not lacking in coding assistant. Again, the example that they use is very useful there. But if I want to leave you on a positive note, is that if you are trying to automate something in your company, or you are an automation company and you want to automate stuff for your clients, then you should try to use these workflows to automate everything, even the smallest thing. Even if it's a 1 minute automation that you can achieve with one of these workflows, do it anyways, because then you can do this thing a billion times, and that's good, I guess. Okay, that's it. I finished my note. So thank you for listening, and see you next time.